So far, I got the technology right. Hello, everybody. Thank you. That was a tough act to follow, to tell you the truth. I'm going to take it from focusing on the technology, on the detail, to perhaps more telling you more about the story of the journey that we've had to go on a company to be ready culturally for AI and for systems that learn, and more of a corporate approach on this. But to start, maybe a little bit about BT and how we've been involved with innovation up to the point. So I'm going to talk about BT, talk about the innovation, a little bit about our cultural change, then I'll take you through some of our priorities culturally and commercially on AI, then through a couple of case studies, and then finish off with an invitation to get involved with something, which I'll talk to you about in a minute. But if you look at BT, we've been at the forefront at these inflection points as we drive to make everything connected with everything else. And if you look at over the last little while, we've been there at the start with a two-way transatlantic with Bell Labs, telephone call, the digital telephone exchange, live data calls, the first 4G network, recently 3 terabits per second over legacy fiber, running into the BT tower from our Ipswich labs, which is key to us to be able to push the boundaries to enable us to commercially allow the UK to be competitive with the world. And these technologies actually are able to roll out. And then, of course, we're involved in the forefront of 5G technology. Each of these points have been inflection points that we've needed to knock down the door, remove barriers, and change the way we play the game on technology. We're at this inflection point again, needing how to use AI. And we've had to go through a bit of a journey in terms of how we do technology. It's a little different than what we've had to do innovation before. And what I mean by that culturally, there's a cultural change. There's a way we've needed to change how we do it. So if we look at our traditional way on how we've done it, we had a team in Adastral and a few of the other labs around the world who had the innovation stick. And they were the people who were actually responsible for transforming and driving technology. But the reality is when you deal with something that is hyperscale like this and the levels of complexity that are beyond just us, we really need to crowdsource this and open up to a much more open and work with partners externally and work with crowdsourcing. And I'll get back to that at the very end on the last slide with an invitation to you on how you can help us. So moving on. Technology-driven versus experience-driven. Well, we love technology in BT. Yeah, we really do. But ultimately, more and more these days, we're selling an SLA rather than a pipe or a piece of kit. We're selling an experience. And for our customers, for most of our customers, they don't want to see the technology. They want to see the outcome. And in order to do that, in order to start thinking about the experience and working back within technology, we have to change the stovepipes. We have to change how our security teams, how our network teams, how our service teams work and think about this. And we need to think about the customer first. But that drives complexity. And that complexity requires systems that learn and requires AI. And part of this mental change is going from boxes to experiences. And this is where AI, or particularly learning systems right now at the start, is going to enable us on how to get there. Long-term planning. So that is complexity, dealing with complexity. Now, long-term planning versus dynamic planning, we were great with the 5-year plan in terms of our research. But the reality is business, priorities, things that happen in the market, technology change, dynamics, and the speed that things work today than worked 5 years ago, it has changed. So this is about agility. Yeah? So the previous one was about scale and complexity, and this one is around agility and the speed that we need to change our culture. And for that, and how we will work our networks, is that we need to be able to pivot and change the way we develop on an agile and a rapid and a digital type approach as opposed to the traditional monolithic Big Bang approach that we would do. And we also realized that the dynamics of what we do with our kit, so where we would make an investment that a piece of hardware would be amortized over 4 or 5 years, now actually we need it virtualized in a VNF, at the edge, in compute, on the network, that's performing the routing capability, but also compute function, that we can reprogram that in 6 months or 12 months and change the dynamic of what we actually need to be doing on that edge compute capability. So we're going from the traditional model of the server under the box, under the desk, and then we went to data centers, and then we went to cloud. And now, because of the dynamics that we're dealing with our customers, both with latency and also the dynamic that is changing, we're moving it from the cloud back closer to the edge where we have fog computing. Yeah, and I'll talk more about that when we talk about some of the case studies as well. So that is a reality that we need to be dealing with, and the agility, that's what we're dealing with that as well. A couple other things, just in terms of more pragmatic commercial drivers. From previously, we would do blue sky approach where we'd allow our research agencies to incubate and then produce. We didn't really have a metric on how we measured success. And there was one of the metrics that we came up with was concept to market. What is the time it takes? And what is the success rate of getting it from out of the labs and into the hands of changing the experience of customers? So there's a right first time, and there's also speed to market from thinking about it and getting it to market. So we need to change our guide. Now, we still have a percentage of our capital that we spend in our labs, which is massive. We still spend a percentage on completely blue sky, just atomic concepts, big picture, and just unfettered. But reality, there's more of a venture capitalist approach where we have the business units who have business problems coming in and working with the research teams and gaming it, hothousing it, and then making it very focused in terms of driving an outcome in terms of achievement. I won't go too much about that, but there is a distinct change on how we're trying to make it fit for purpose in our market and closing that gap between the concept to the market and making sure that more of the research and intelligence and innovation and inspiration gets out of the lab and into the hands and changes the experience of the users. And the last one, of course, I've talked a little bit about this, is a focus on technology and innovation to a broader innovation culture. So at the start, I talked about open innovation externally, but there's also an innovation culture internally, because with AI, there is a huge importance for us, we find a huge importance on context. So you can have very clever algorithms and machine learning that can do things, but without context, the value is not achieved. And I'll tell you a little bit more about when I talk about our failures. Yes, I'll get to some of our failures to give you some ideas as well. But so context in this case, a broader innovation culture, is reaching out to people who are not just in the labs, but who are on our service desks, who understand the context and the reality of the customer experience. The people who are in the vans, who are in the field. The people who are on the sales desks, who understand things as well. So all of those things are about enhancing and pulling in innovation from a broader innovation culture within our organization. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a view on some of the really fundamental cultural changes we need to go through as an organization to get ourselves ready to actually start transforming into an AI-driven organization. So where are our key areas that we found that we will be able to transform and drive value both for our customers and also for how we do ourselves? Well, one of this is about empowering and supporting our employees. So if we look at traditional models of things in a help desk, learning systems, we would have issues where every time you'd have a call, different people, depending on who answered that call, would solve the problem differently. And there would be different times and efficacies in resolving a problem. But if we can put an assistant in there that can understand the error code in the first place, who can contextually understand who's calling, can contextually understand what they've called about before, can look at the network and understand what's going on around it, then can also learn from the last 3, 4, 20, 100 times that this problem has come up, and then recommend what was the most efficient resolution to that as a guide, as an aid to that person who's working on that. You can start to have the general background noise of chaos to a higher level of customer service that we're doing. And we take customer service extremely seriously, and realize that we still have a ways to go on that. And AI and systems that learn are a very powerful tool for us to be able to transform that. And to start by doing that is empowering our employees to do the very best job, to remove them from the drudgery of some of the root cause analysis, the correlation, the deduplication, the contextual topology learning that you would require them to do, and make that available to allow them to do the higher order stuff to give that customer the service that they actually require. And that is transformational in terms of what we're doing. Of course, there's new services and new customer experiences that we would like to do as well. And there's some really exciting ways around there. And this is allowing us to monetize in new areas. And let's face it, as traditional voice costs, or the revenues and the ARPU on voice and broadband and network value goes down, there's a search for relevance in service providers. Is what do we actually add as a value add in the organization, rather than just being the carrier of bits and pipes. And being the instrumentation of the internet as a provider allows us to be in a fantastic position to add value if we can just be innovative enough to generate things. Now, taking all that petabytes of data that we have and instrumenting that and creating new monetization capabilities is really, really exciting for us, and probably something that we're going to get into further swing as well, because we've really focused on solving some of the big challenges, some grand challenges, which I'll talk about. It's also been solving that. But areas like IoT, the compute, and also the application autonomics, and I'll talk a little bit about that as well, where you create feedback loops where applications are enabled to ask for help of the network with no intervention. So there's learning feedback loops that we're starting to create, and that we can provide a better quality of service, that application, whether it be a video stream or whatever, might get into trouble. And then rather than waiting for a customer to call up and complain that their video conference didn't work, that application can ask for help, and the network can orchestrate by itself and learn, is that customer entitled? So there's entitlement. Is that customer contractually allowed to do that? Is there an auto pay opportunity? Is there a burstability that we could charge them for it? Is there enough resources in the network to allow us to fulfill that? What other scheduled things are coming down the pipeline? Are there any major banks doing, booking in the next hour, 90% of our capacity, et cetera, to do that? And part of this is being able to really apply AI in new ways to empower applications to deliver service experiences. And that's quite an exciting way. It will change some of the dynamics on how we will sell things as well. Sort of a consume model rather than a fixed contract, perhaps, rather than a capitalizable asset. New models and new models of economy on how we will sell things will be interesting as well. Flawless operations and autonomics, I've sort of touched upon that already. So now we're getting to some interesting things where we have contracted to take on some very large, very high availability responsibilities for some customers. And in order to deliver that resilience and that certainty, the agility of networks have to be faster than a human operator can operate it at this point. So agility has gone beyond. So networks need to start making decisions for themselves. They need to guide themselves. They need to self-heal. So that's really one of the things that are really important for us on how both we work our fixed networks and also our wireless networks. And really, as far as our customers, we're trying to provide ubiquitous access that is seamless and transport independent is really the experience that we're trying to do for that. And then the last one on here for us is really, if you look at 5G, software-defined access, edge compute, cybersecurity, of course, and IoT, the complexity is too much for any of our operators to manage, any one individual, even our brightest minds. So AI and systems that learn, there's ability to make sense of it all and display it in a way that a human being can and deal with that complexity. Because part of our problems that we've challenged with is resolution times because of the complexity of our networks now, or maintenance or root cause analysis can be ferociously difficult because of the complexity of the networks that are out there and the decisions that need to be made. And therefore, it's hugely important to be able to apply systems that learn to A, make sense of it all, control it, and B, visualize it in a way that a human being can make sense of it and make some management decisions on it. So that's that. The other thing, moving on, how do we monetize this? How do we get the business case through? So that's a challenge and a change for us as well. So what I want to talk to you about this very quickly is about value. How do we make the case for systems that learn? How do we make the case for AI? It's more than just cost transformation. And the reality is that we've found that new metrics are needed. So if I give you an example, back to the service desk again. If we start putting some of those things I talked about before in place, that what we found actually is that the traditional metrics of productivity for these people on the desk go down. And you'd wonder why that. Well, the reality is what's happening is as they're freed from the drudgery of just slamming the calls, closing them down, doing the basics, all these things that are qualitative that had been swept under the table, these people are freed to start go looking for and spending more time with the customer to resolve those that are preventative of multiple calls. Yeah, so if you look at service desks, you can have similar issues that are resolved tactically, but the problem management. So the incident management is resolved quickly, but the problem management, which is what is the root cause? What is the learning behind that? How do we affect meaningful, lasting change so you actually drive those incidents down? Now, the KPIs were focused on closing that incident. But the reality is with learning systems, it frees up enough time and breathing space for these people to be curious again, to actually have a dialogue with the customer and resolve the incident, but also have enough time to have a wider context discussion to deal with the problem. And that's hugely important in terms of how we need to change the dynamic. So what we're saying here is that we are going through our own journey and realizing that in the advent of learning systems and AI, we do need to change and think about, we recognize that there are new metrics needed and how we change that as well in terms of outputs. Does that make sense? Okay. So let's go on to, and I'm not going to do as much justice as to what Una was talking about that, but we have applied this in the wild. This is for real. This is how we do our business now. And it's very interesting, actually, because in the last 6 months, working with our vendors, the anomalous behavior detection that was previously, pretty cutting edge in the cybersecurity area has widened into the network domain. And one of the interesting dynamics right now is that anomaly detection in Wi-Fi networks with some of our partners, or in just general LAN management or the WAN management, there is a race now to look at anomaly detection and use that as a very, very powerful tool, as people are finally doing something with the data that we've seen on the network for years. And that drives a couple of interesting things, is the concept of deep packet inspection at a number of different points. There are more than one engine looking at this, and one of the things that we're probably having a discussion is, well, how do we abstract that deep packet inspection and do it in the most efficient way, but share it with a number of different engines rather than having multiple deep packet inspection engines at the same point doing the same thing and then with an engine. So we're trying to look at federation models where people share that deep packet inspection, do a better job of it, do it in more places rather than everybody following the rugby ball, which is the analogy I would use being involved with rugby. That's kind of where we're going right now, is that the vendors and the people that we've been working with is everybody's following the ball. So you have a couple of areas that are highly instrumented from multiple different platforms and domains: performance, overlay, underlay, and security. And all of them are looking to look inside the packets and do that deep packet inspection and then run their analytic engines on top of it. And then you have cyber engines that try to take all of that, sort of collate it, absorb it, digest, ingest, and then make sense of it. But the reality is that each one of those platforms are now putting their own AI on top of them and learning systems and doing anomaly detection as well, and some of it is hugely powerful in terms of that behavior as well, because you go back 2-3 years ago and you look at a network operations wallboard and it'd be a sea of Reddit sometimes, and that's because we may not have got the topology information to understand the parent-child relationship between, we weren't suppressing the events and getting to the root cause and presenting it, any number of things. Things like inventory as well. Learning systems for us are hugely important to get inventory right, because you have networks. You try to stop leakage of information and inventory into a network. You try to control all the ingress points, when you order it, where you deliver it, but stuff turns still back up on people's networks that we didn't know about. So really, what we're trying to do is change these networks to make them learning, so that anything that hits that network, we understand it, we profile it, we understand its threat posture, we understand how to deal with it, and understand whether or not we should entitle it, and actually inform our customers on that. That's not been a relationship or capability we've been able to do until we started having deep packet learning systems on top of it, an anomaly detection to be able to take action on that and monetize that, so that the sanctity of the inventory and the ability to manage a network is kept still. So the power of analytics here and AI, obviously, just very quickly and moving on, is we're trying to make sense, and there's obviously an anomaly layer, but one of the things is, we have this in we've got 3D headsets and 3D virtualized representations of the data. And one of the biggest challenges with some of the cyber analytics and the threat one is, how do you visualize the complexity of the threat and be able to get to it very, very quickly, and allowing the human brain to do what it's incredibly good at, which is pattern recognition, but present those patterns in a visual format culled from data that you really can't see the pattern from, and provide some assistance on how to do that, and recommendation, and sometimes just say it's that. So two things on this: is the AI to drive the engine, and the second one is the AI to help visualize and present that are two of the key areas that we're doing. Okay, so let's move on to another example. So cities that learn. Okay, so keeping in mind at the time, cities that learn, we have two cities in the UK that we're heavily involved with. One is Manchester, and one is Milton Keynes. And both of those are heavily instrumented smart city efforts. And one of the things that we found from a business perspective is using, the concept is a smart city that is fully instrumented, pulling that information back, and they're learning about the system. They're trying to drive efficiency around energy use, traffic flows, ecology concerns, water use, you name it. They're thinking about it. Parking, user traffic, advertising, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And how they pick up the rubbish, the flows, the sensors in the bins. There was three crews every day going around and checking every bin in Milton Keynes. And they put ultrasonic sensors to check the level of the garbage bins. And they've moved from 3 crews down to 1, and they can cover everything. So that they're still giving the same use in terms of efficacy on garbage linked into the system. Because all these smart cities that we're dealing with, the one thing that comes through is they don't know how to do their business case. We're having to help them figure out how do they do a business case to move to a smart city and how they apply that. And things like the transformation capability of these, where the budgets are dwindling. The money is, when I speak to some of these councillors, they say the money's going to run out at some point because of care of the aged, the demographics, the funding models, etc. So they have to get a lot smarter, a lot quicker to take the cost out some areas, be a lot more efficient to monetize things, and then do that. And we're really proud to be involved with that. But some of the decisions, some of it is making it smart and being able to get the business case right is one of the pivot areas that we're doing. But the other pivot case is around, when I talked about fog computing, this is really real. If you think about smart roads and smart vehicles, well, you've all heard about driverless cars, right? Now, there's a latency issue and a reality on some of those roads. Some of the models that we need to think about is, well, what if you have multiple vendors? If you have smart cars at the traffic light and you're trying to get the traffic to flow, and they're all smart cars and they're all multiple different vendors, well, a smart car will wait for the next car to take off and then it'll start. Well, actually, what we want is all those vehicles all at once from all the vendors to take off at once. So if you take fluid dynamics or hydrodynamics, you want the whole flow, the whole traffic flow to work. Now that requires extremely low latency, transactional learning processing, and command and control that is vendor independent as an overlay. So essentially, a smart traffic light. Now, the latency that we would want to do, because this is safe carrying of human lives, is not back to the US or to Europe or to a cloud data center that is hundreds of milliseconds away. You're wanting to make this in 10, 20, whatever millisecond in much lower decision-making cycles, because these are human lives at care. So you need to push that compute capability close. There's a physicality to this. So these smart cities and the AI control systems need to work from that perspective. So that is some of the other dynamics. Now, keeping an eye on the time, there's a lot of examples that I could go through. Ones where the complexity of our contracts, we need AI systems to learn and be able to react and digest all these 500-page contract, et cetera, and understand the context of that contract and apply it to the SLIs in our networks. We're starting to use it for real learning systems to digest, read, understand what the contractual implications, and then apply that to how we operate. There's ones where we need to understand and learn about what devices and what the user behavior is, and then we can select what type of stream it is, whether or not it's a small screen on a phone versus a big screen. We'll give people a different stream in terms of the model that we're doing, in terms of what type of video they'll get. So we're learning from the devices. We're providing a different level of user experience and working from that. Where can AI go wrong? Well, safe to say, if you think about trading systems and AI systems that are learning, cascade failures, you can fail a lot quicker. So very quickly, working with a vendor, 2 or 3 years ago, they said, okay, Colin, do you want us to make the network make the final decision to reconverge autonomically? And we said, well, give us a recommendation, but still put a human in at this point at that level of control, because we didn't really trust it. At this point, we're moving towards where we can let the leads go completely to allow it. But there's been a few points at this point that the algorithms and the learning and the lessons learned and the gaming and the planning needs to be of a certain level. So that needs to be done. Moving on very quickly. Why don't we just finish off with Infinity Lab. So we talked about crowdsourcing. So 12th of March, I don't know if anybody is involved with the with working on projects around AI. But we're looking for small companies. So we're working with the Cabinet Office, we're working with Tech Hub, and we're looking for small, medium enterprises to get involved with this. And we're looking for big ideas that we can apply into 3 categories: digital public services, defense enablement, and digital retail. So we've got a panel of judges set up, which you can see up there, and it's not too late to apply. So anybody who's interested in applying, this comes to the crowdsourcing, this comes to the open innovation. So if you're interested in getting involved, I'd be really, really interested in having you get involved from that perspective. Now, I'm conscious of the time that we need to get to Q&A, so thank you very much, and let's get on to Q&A. Thank you.
So any success stories of how you've been working with startups you can share?
I've got a couple of guys. Where have we got a couple of guys? So we have an incubation lab. Is anybody in this? Rich, are you in the room? We've got a hand from Rich. Is there nobody in the room?
Maybe we better save that question.
Yeah, so absolutely. We have up in the labs, we've got photonic labs, for instance, photonic ones. We do 2 things. We bring in, so there's a photonic company that we got up in the labs where it's optical learning, and we spun one out regularly. I think we can follow up. There's a list as long as your arm that we could go through in terms of startups and success, but we need to do more. Let's move on.
By when do you expect systems that learn to become part of the business as usual fabric of BT?
Good question. I'd say probably over the next 3 years, we're sort of bringing it in. Some are there already, but you have to understand, as a service provider, we have a massive legacy estate. So what you'll see is layering on top of legacy before you fully replace with the new systems. So there'll be compensating systems that sit in between in the meantime. Okay?
Do you see innovation for BT as coming from within the organization in the future or outside of it? For example, from SMEs and universities?
Absolutely. I think it is 50-50. Yeah, we don't have all the answers. We do want to, there's a maturity scale for that, where 5 years out, it's definitely universities. 4 years out, it's standards bodies. Sort of 3 years out, you're working with the vendors. 2 years out, you're working with your customers, and 1 year out, you're essentially, well, you're executing it. Yeah. So there's a phasing often. That's an overly simplistic view, but that gives you a view of sort of how we would phase things from that.
Google, Facebook, and Amazon have a bundle of data. What advantages does BT have in the AI space? Can BT compete? Because you certainly have lots of data.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's interesting. I don't feel like we have to compete because these are federated pools of data that we're trying to join up. They are people that we want to enable to get data to, we want to get connected to. Amazon, we try to federate, connect, and do a better job of connecting our and help our customers get connected to. If I was to say, how do we differentiate? So Google, Amazon, and folks will have great data on user behavior, individual user behavior, and they have great information primarily on what's happening in their data centers, on the applications, whereas we are every other application, including those, that is known, that runs on the internet. So we see all of them, right? Whereas these only see what they've got, and we also have the networks themselves, and they're all instrumented. So I think there is a complementary aspect rather than a competition aspect.
Are there any tools used to enable the innovation culture? This is presumably within BT.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one is that we monetize it. We're the skin in the game. There was Wakaba, which is an innovation culture, a new ideas scheme, for instance. And there are some prolific people who have ideas, who are in the field, who are gain sharing part of the ideas if we can get it from the concept to market. So anybody who's interested in that, please contact me afterwards. There's people in this room, in the back of the room, who are involved with that process, and we can provide information on that. It's something we're quite proud of. We've been doing it for quite a few years. I think it's a great success, and there's people who are very humble, who do simple jobs every day at the coalface, who constantly come up with the good ideas. They're the ones that know the problem, and they're the ones most often have the answer. And being able to find a way to get those answers back through the sausage maker, back into the organization is hugely important. And we have created vehicles to do that. So do come talk to me afterwards.
How do you evaluate the decision of buying expertise versus developing it in-house?
That's a really good question. And I'd like to say I have a clear answer, but the answer is it depends. It really depends on the context, depends on the time. Also, to be completely honest, we move from it's like the tide. It's an evolutionary tide. It goes out, sometimes there's a heavy emphasis for a couple of years on off-the-shelf cot stuff, and then it comes back inside and working with third parties. The reality is what's driving it is the capital. We have a fire hose of capital to hose things down, but there are more fires asking for that fire hose than we could ever hose down. So there is a process where we prioritize what is the best way to achieve the outcome. And if that makes a decision, if the decision is about external, your decision on time, agility, time to market, and also the costs against the wider context. We're not precious about developing it in-house. We're quite happy to work with externals as long as it achieves the outcomes and the bigger challenge of integrating it with the legacy infrastructure we already have. That's also one of the massive decisions that we have to make is how do we fit it in with everything else that we've got? Yeah.
So with every company becoming a technology company and a shortage of skills, how is BT getting to the people it needs to meet its AI goals? In other words, how are you hiring, how are you competing with all the other folks wanting AI talent?
It's a really good question. I think that the market will pay very well for these skill sets. And we will never achieve what we need. So there's two ways. There's our graduate university schemes. There's hiring extremely talented professionals are already in the field. The reality is this is moving so fast that the experts last year are the neophyte next year. So there's a commitment to lifelong learning. So if you take the idea that there's a commitment to lifelong learning, then we're really interested in new, fresh talent out of the universities and bringing them into the organization, particularly graduate students who can supercharge our work on this. But at the same time, we realize that there's people internally that we need to redevelop and change the mindset of our own organization. So it's a split between developing in-house, because you're never going to hire enough people externally or find them in the market. So the reality is we need to make a commitment for lifelong learning internally, that the game that we're playing this year, the game rules will be changed next year, and that what we actually need to do is develop an agile, flexible workforce who is okay with change, who embraces change and is still willing to make a lifelong commitment to learning, to go along with that, to stay ahead and be curious and be challenging on this. And that's what we're trying to develop internally.
And a knock-on question is, what were the cultural challenges moving to a more agile working style within BT?
Well, I was talking about this with the leadership team not too many days ago. There is a cultural, financial adversarial models where unless you have your money, you don't necessarily protect your job. But going for just that money for that one point thing, when you're dealing with system-wide solutions now, you need to change that financial model on how people justify their next year's work. So dealing with how we allocate money and how our CFOs work is one of the key enablers to change that culture, to change the adversarial people fighting for their fiefdom, their turf. If we can remove that as a barrier to get people to step back, that's a really exciting way to allow people to think end to end and think of the bigger picture rather than go through the machinations of just solving their problem and layering something on top of what's left over, the legacy stuff. So that's one of the key areas that we're looking to change, and change on terms of our culture, that we need to be ready for the future.